Our final unit is all about how communication is changing with technology and what's called communication in the new media. So communication in the new media just means that technology changes the way we communicate. And in today's world, you're well aware of how technology impacts communication. So we're just going to define some of the terms in Chapter 10, and you'll want to make sure to read Chapter 10 and fill out the rest of your study guide. So the first thing we're going to talk about is social media, right? That's one form of the new media. And as social media continues to grow as sort of our main means for interaction, it's also become this major medium for discussion and communication of issues and our consumption of news. If you think about how much news we get from social media, and how much we communicate electronically, you can see that that's becoming almost as if you have verbal, nonverbal, and new media. It's almost its own category of communication. That leads us to question the validity of the media we consume, right? Fake news, what's real, what isn't real. That's a little bit harder to decipher, and new media is a part of that. That also leads us to ask and leads social scientists to ask, how do people interact with new media? So, this idea that we communicate, interact, and personalize and even own media and own communication is really radically changing the landscape of what communication looks like and what it can be. So there's a couple of terms, and they reflect how communication has changed over time. So when we started out, there was a lot of oral tradition, speaking. In the very beginning, most stories were transmitted, or histories or knowledge was transmitted orally. And for us, that was the telephone or even the internet. We moved to written tradition, which was printed text or printed language. And really what's happened in the new media is the electronic tradition. And this is where we use some form of technology or electronics to access content, right? So it's almost as important as speaking and written tradition, this oral tradition, and this written tradition, electronic traditions are now becoming just as important. So what is new media? New media has four characteristics, basically. It has this idea that the devices in which you can use to communicate, and the multifunctionality of those devices create infinite possibilities for communication. If you really listed all the different ways that you communicate through a device, a computer, right, in different forms within the device, whether that's messaging within an app or email or text messaging, there's so much multifunctionality. It also is characterized by a lot of people, or many speaking to many. So if you think about commenting on a discussion board, that's a lot of people talking to others. Just a lot of voices, a lot of communication, many speaking to many. It's two-way, right? I can post a post, someone can respond, I can respond back, and it allows you to retain your individuality. That's what new media is. And think about all our different forms of communication that allow that. There are some characteristics of new media. First of all, it has to be interactive. So what makes this so interesting to social scientists is that new media is basically communication at a distance. It's real time. It's in an environment that's constantly changing. You get used to one form of Instagram, they update it, and things change. They add a new app, right? It's constantly changing. It's in real time, right? It's down to the second. You can also personalize it, so you really can manage, just like you can manage your nonverbals, you can really manage your media's appearance and how it looks, and that really has an impact on communication of the self, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. Another characteristic, if I can get this to change, is that it's creative. So you have the ability to display your style, your personality, and interests in a way that is fun and entertaining. So it allows us to have a lot of self-expression and to retain our individuality. It's flexible, it's available when people want it, as fast as people can get it, right? Middle of the night, other countries. If you want access to new media, you can get it. And it's always evolving. And so that makes it a little overwhelming to some users because keeping up with that can be overwhelming and that can really impact our communication. So there is a term called computer-mediated communication, and within new media, this is human connection facilitated by technology. And this is really the world that we're moving into, this computer-mediated communication. It's really reshaped the way we communicate, right? We use technology in ways that have never been used before in order to communicate, computer-mediated communication. So there's two important final slides. First of all, think about, and this is what social scientists are thinking about, there's not a lot of research yet because we're still really trying to understand, first of all, the impact on self-disclosure. So you know this, you've seen this, people are willing to say things online that they wouldn't say to someone face to face. So the lack of face to face is the effect of making people self-disclose more than they do in face to face interactions. That is positive and negative. Support groups, spaces online where you feel like you can be your authentic self, right? That can be found and have a good impact on self-disclosure, but it also makes people horrible and say terrible things that they would never say face to face. So we've seen a direct impact on the way people communicate and the amount of self-disclosure that they're willing to do online. There's a lot of peripheral information. It's just this relatively minor information about yourself that you give out, your birthday, your likes and dislikes, the things that you support or don't support. So instead of telling people that information, you tend to glean all of that through their communication on social media or in new media. Have you ever had the experience where you meet up with friends and that you haven't seen for a while and you don't have anything to say to them because you've been following their social media feed, so you know everything that happened, and it's really impacting our face-to-face communication. Excuse me. There's also the absence of verbal cues. So unlike face-to-face communication, we're missing, those nonverbals that really help us understand how to interpret behavior and how to interpret messages. So by missing that, we often have a lot of miscommunication. All of this has led us to the social information processing theory. And that says that with the impact of new media, relationships develop only to the extent that people first gain information about one another, and then that information forms impressions or mental images of one another. This is the idea that we use new media to understand what we think somebody is like or who somebody is, when in reality, that's just who they're presenting through new media. And that may not be their true self, or maybe it is, but the idea is that we form these impressions or images of one another based on the information we've learned that's facilitated by new media. So it just is showing how much new media is changing our self-disclosure. So it's a short chapter. It's not a lot of concepts because it's still evolving and developing as media changes. But as you continue to read, look for all the different ways that new media and technology are really impacting communication.